Hello and welcome to Ignore All Previous Instructions. This is Pam talking, and it's just me this week. I'm going to do a little bit of a mini episode. I had to cancel this week's recording because I had jury duty. So I served on a jury this week. I'm finished, so I can tell you that I was on a jury and it's all over. And we talked a lot, or at least the judges and the staff talked a lot about how we were doing civic duty and really anchored into that as much as, voting is important, so is jury duty. And so they talked a lot about voting this week as well. And so if you have somehow missed it and you haven't gotten 8,000 text messages, I remind you yet again to vote if you haven't already and to do some civic participation. And so also, another thing I thought in terms of this week, I'll just share some stuff that I found interesting recently in the mini episode. And as well, also, apologies for the sound, my sound last episode. I loved having David Dylan Thomas on. And if you haven't listened to the episode, it's so great. And except that my audio is terrible because I was recording in a different space. And so I want to thank my friend Jeff for loaning me some sound isolation equipment to test that out to see if this makes this go a little better. So thanks, Jeff. And so back to voting. So something that's interesting is if you haven't voted yet and perhaps you're in a swing state and you perhaps might be in the category of people who aren't super thrilled to vote for Harris. I'm not in that camp, but some people are. There is a website called swapyourvote.org, and where you can choose, if you live in a safe state, you could sign up and say, hey, person in a swing state, I will vote for your protest candidate if you vote for future President Harris. And I find this interesting because this is not illegal. This is totally fine. Uh, and that, furthermore, another note for that is that the legality of ballot selfies is another thing I find interesting. Most states, it is legal, but sometimes it's only legal if it is your own. Generally, it should only be your own ballot, but some states it's only okay if it's your absentee ballot. And interesting stuff. And of course, your ballot selfie, that would only really be relevant if you post it to social media. If you're swapping your vote and you're sharing your information on your own, I think you do you. So that's voting aside. So other things I found interesting. I went and saw The Substance. This is a horror movie, I believe you should classify it as that. And I thought this movie was so interesting in the context that I also recently read this summer. I read Pixel Flesh, and I'll put some links for some of these things I'm mentioning in the notes. And and so The Substance is a dramatic horror story taking down beauty culture. And I thought it was so interesting, especially after having Pixel Flesh, the tagline of Pixel Flesh is something along the lines of how toxic beauty culture is harming women. And watching The Substance, having read that book, and it hits very differently now when I'm on the highway and see those billboards for plastic surgery or see advertisements for Botox or filler. And it's a wild time is all I can say about this movie, and I strongly recommend you see it. Maybe see it with a friend if horror movies aren't your thing. That's what I did, and did a lot of heckling and had a whole lot of fun. So that's another recommendation. I've been reading Invisible Rulers, which is this really fantastic book. And even as I read it, I kept wanting to recommend it, but I generally don't like to recommend books I haven't finished. And so Invisible Rulers is about misinformation, propaganda, rumors. A couple of things that I learned, my takeaways from this book, were that I want to do a little bit more diligence about differentiating between when I'm talking about misinformation and when I'm talking about rumor. A rumor might be, something someone's saying, but it's really that we don't have enough information yet. It's not intentional misinformation. And so there's a difference between misinformation and rumor. Another thing I found really interesting about Invisible Rulers is in the context that we've been building, especially the last many, many years, is that there's an overestimation of state actors. So that at least I was under the impression that there was a lot more state acting going on online and than there actually is. And I find this very interesting. And that some of the arguments of the book, my takeaways are that we have lost trust, and that this is a root rot problem that we have to address. And there's some, suggestions in the back of the book, near the end, as one does. Obviously, because this author is an academic, one of the suggestions is more research, but other things that we can think about as we try to really, this is the book I've been waiting for. I've been looking for this book and looking for something that really deals with and discusses the internet and information and reality. And the discussion in this book, a couple terms that I really liked were bespoke realities and unreality. So bespoke reality being, and I know that you know someone who's in this situation where they've kind of, I call it a brainworm too. That's my and other people I've heard use this term. So a brainworm where someone has gotten so far into the internet where they've created a reality that is separate from maybe the reality that you agree on with many people, is that someone's fallen deep into the internet and they've gotten into this bespoke reality where they believe different things that are a different perception of reality. So bespoke reality. And then I really like the term unreality. So unreality can refer to things that are created by generative AI. So things where it was never real. It was always fake. So unreality. And that's my interpretation of how she used that term. And so then what I'll leave you with in this super short episode to test out this audio setup and say hi and test out if you like these mini-sodes. If you do, please, comment and let me know. And that in the book that the author references the Institute for Propaganda Analysis, which is an organization that existed from 1937 to 1942. That's another just side, again, the things I found so interesting in this book is how much of this is not new. And we might have new-ish super information superhighways, but the introduction of radio, introduction of television, we've done this before. It's different. Not saying it's not different, but it's not, we have done new before. And I found that very interesting. So back to the Institute for Propaganda Analysis. So the Institute for Propaganda Analysis defined seven common devices of propaganda. And so I want to share this with you now, and I'll share a link in the notes. And I want to share this, especially sharing this week, which is this episode comes out a few days before the US presidential election. And, assumedly sometime after that, a US president shall be chosen, and other things have to follow that. But the people will vote, and those votes will be counted. And so there's going to be a lot of information online. And in terms of the 7 common devices as defined by this organization that, again, existed between 1937 and 1942, those devices that I want to tell you are bandwagon, card stacking, glittering generalities, name calling, plain folks, testimonial, and transfer. So I remember when I was in elementary school going to I think language arts class, and we talked about persuasive techniques. And I remember bandwagon, and I remember testimonial. I remember some of these, but some of these were new to me. And so I want to reference a little bit the information. So bandwagon, I'm familiar with. This is everybody, at least all of us, are doing it. So bandwagon being, get on board. Card stacking, this one was not as familiar to me. It was the selection and use of facts or falsehoods to give the best or worst possible case for an idea, program, person, or product. And something I found interesting during jury duty this week is I felt that the arguments that were presented did ask the jury listening to stack, to use this. They were trying to stack, oh, well, we don't know this, or we don't know this. Well, does that matter? And so card stacking. A glittering generality associates something with a virtue word and makes you accept it without evidence. So without having to prove it to me, you've given me a word that makes me supposed to accept this word. And there are definitely going to be examples of this in terms of arguments about the validity of this upcoming election and saying, like just and right and fair. And these can be thrown around to try to convince you to believe something without evidence that it should be believed. Name calling is another one. So giving it a bad label and therefore rejecting it without examining the evidence. Plain folks, this is, I think, so common on the internet now with influence, is that, oh, you can believe me because I'm just a regular person, because I'm just like you. Don't pay attention to that I have a million followers and my life has nothing to do with things because I'm a professional influencer. I'm just like you. And this technique to try and persuade you of their idea. Testimonial. So having someone say that something's good or bad. So that's one I remember from elementary school. And transfer. So carrying the respect and authority of something respected to something else to make the latter accepted. So transfer, kind of like a transitive property. So I'm going to drop a link for a university department's explainer of these 7 common devices for propaganda analysis. And I strongly recommend Invisible Rulers. I think it was a fantastic book. Happy to recommend it. And I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode with another guest because I can't get called for jury duty for another 3 years. So with that, remind you to please like and subscribe. Please, if you are enjoying the show, please share it with a friend. And if you'd like to, I do have stickers on the Patreon if you'd like to support. I'm also thinking about making a little zine of these propaganda techniques. I don't know if I'll get to that this week. It's an idea. If you would really like it, and please let me know. And then I will make it happen. Anyway, please follow us on Instagram at Tech Cult Podcast, at techcult.podcast. Same on TikTok that I don't use yet, and then on YouTube at Tech Cult Podcast. Thank you so much. Until next time.